to another episode of Let's Talk D&D. As promised, today we're talking about the new 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. Just to show off, just like the Player's Handbook, I think there's a lot of good in this. I do think it's failing, though. I think its chief failing is that it's more useful for new DMs, and that's good. New DMs should definitely pick up this book. If you're going to be the forever DM of your group and you're new to the game yourself and you're trying to get other people who are new in, this book is going to help you. Because there's a lot of parts in it that are specifically catered to new DMs, both so that they understand their role and how to actually run the game. Whereas new DMs, they don't need that as much. They're going to focus more on like the section with magic items. They're probably going to look at the lore glossary a little bit. But otherwise, let's dive into a little bit of this right here. I think the biggest thing, and it's going to depend a little bit on how the monster manual shows up and how that's going to look, is the way encounters work now is you're going to have an XP budget. So they kind of had that before, but it was a little wonky. It wasn't always accurate to how difficult the encounter would be. And if you ask a lot of DMs, they would say that they actually made their encounters much more difficult because the players were, very powerful. Now, the thing is the player's handbook, what a lot of people are saying, and what's actually really true, is that it seems like the players are even more powerful than 2014, which is also true. So I think what they're kind of going to go for, and we'll see how it shakes out when the monster manual comes out, is I think what's going to shake out is that the monsters are going to be much harder, or at least their XP, their XP for the budget is going to be more accurate to this new level of, calibration. So the way it works is, there's a chart in the book. It has, the level on one side, and then it has easy, medium, difficult. And essentially what you do is, so let's say you got a group of 4 level 1 players. So if you look at level 1, it has, for hard difficulty, it, says 100 is going to be your EXP budget. But that's for 1 player. So you multiply that by 4. So ideally, for a difficult encounter, you're going to have 400 XP worth of creatures in that encounter. Now again, I can't stress enough, it will depend on the monster manual. Because if the monster manual is largely unchanged, or if they, alter stat blocks so that, maybe easier creatures are just that much easier, or more difficult creatures are much more difficult, it's going to change whether or not this is an accurate way of encounter building. But again, I think for new DMs, they're probably going to start out slow. Like, I think if I was a brand new DM, I would start off, like, the very first encounter they're going to do is going to be easy. Just enough to where any players I have that are new are just going to be able to go, okay, here's how I move, here's how I attack, here's how I do this. And then they can get used to it. And then, part of being a DM is just also gauging how well your players are able to adapt to that kind of thing. I think if you look at a lot of DMs, like, I'm sure there's groups out there that, have DMs and players that have played for ages, and, like, it's almost hard to, actually challenge them. And so even though they're, at, like, level 15 or something, they can probably handle things much, much more above what would even be a difficult or a deadly encounter by the old rules. So that is a thing to keep in mind if you're a DM and you're going to be using this. But I'm really hoping that it's all kind of calibrated correctly, because I think that was one of the biggest feelings of the old book. It's, even to this day, like, I'm always hesitant building encounters, because, the few times I've had to make original encounters, because I haven't had, like, that much chance to DM, just for various reasons. But there has been a few times where I have vastly, overestimated my players, and then there's been times where I've vastly underestimated my players. And, you never want to be the DM that does a TPK, but, sometimes it happens. You just gotta have to kind of deal with it as it goes. So there's that. I think the other big thing in the book is you have the bastions now. And essentially what it is at level 5, each player can have a bastion. You can also have your players like pool their bastions together into one facility. I think that's probably going to be what most players will end up doing, mostly because it's one of those things where it's like, especially from a role play perspective, like even if there's say like places around a city, from a role play perspective, you want all of your players to be more or less in the same spot. They can be in the city, and they can each have their own space, or they can just have like their one big guild hall that they have. And I think a lot of players will go for that, mostly so that they can use each other's facilities. Uh, I will say some of the facilities seem kind of useless, and I say that mechanically speaking, very very strictly on a mechanical level. Because some facilities will allow you to like create items, which is useful. Some facilities are going to allow you to contact spies that can gather information in a certain radius from your bastion. But I will say this: is I think for the facilities that are less mechanically useful, as a DM, I would highly highly recommend that you give some incentives to players who pick the less useful facilities. Something like the pub. Like you have the pub in there, and essentially, like at a certain level, you can get special drinks, and you get these drinks, and they give you basically some sort of effect. Like this one allows you to walk on walls for 24 hours, or gives you a climb speed to for 24 hours, or this one lets you do this. But here's the trick: is that you have the drinks, but the drinks lose their effect after an hour. So if your party has to do anything more than a day's journey from your bastion, then those drinks are pointless. And let's face it, not a lot of campaigns are going to be so localized that they're always within a day's reach. And especially once you reach level 5, because if you remember the tiers of play from the old book, and they touch on this in the new book a little bit as well, is that for 1 through 5, like you're kind of like the novices, like that's the point where you're handling more local stuff. After level 5, like you're starting to dealing with things on a kingdom level, and then you're going further and further away. And level 5 is kind of when you start adventuring far beyond your local area. So even if you go for the pub right away and get those drinks right away, they're still effectively useless the second that you travel more than a day's journey. So I would recommend, like for DMs, for something like that, either allow your players, like honestly, just give them a magic flask and say, hey, you can put the drink in the magic flask and it won't go bad. I think that's like a fair way to do that, and make that still a thing that they can take advantage of. Even the spy thing, part of the pub is like you can use it to like get rumors and create spy contacts, but it's only within a certain radius of your citadel. And again, that's useful. That's useful to a certain degree, unless you need to find out something beyond that radius. And so, as a DM, I would probably say you can find out things beyond that radius. It just takes more time. And that's a good thing, because then while your players are like maybe following like the only lead they have, then they come back, and then by that point, maybe the person that, you have working the pub has like maybe a number of other leads that they can investigate, and then they can like whittle that down, as they go and check out these leads. And so like they come back, and like maybe the bartender goes, oh, well, I have 3 leads on like the MacGuffin that you guys are looking for. And they go, okay, well, we'll check out this lead. And, they go do that. And they come back. And then the pub bartender, tavern keeper, whatever you want to call it, goes, okay, well, I had some spies look into this lead, so this is the only lead that's left. And then they can go on that. So it's a matter of like, you give the players the choices of what they want to eliminate and how. And it also gives you some buffering time to like make those encounters, so that this way you can, it's kind of a way where it's like, you can give the players like, okay, what is interesting to you? Which of these missions appeals to you the most? And then they can do that, and then you can, from there, choose the mission after that you are interested in having them run. And this way there's a little give and take. It's like the DM gets to do something they do, players get to do things that they want to do, and then it progresses the story, and I think that's perfect. Because I think the other thing is, I also think you don't want players going into Bastions and going, well, well, I'm not going to use this facility. Like, like let's face it, you're playing like a drunken master monk. You're going to want that pub because that is like literally your character. Is that you are you're a monk that drinks, and so it's one of those things where you want the monk to be able to get that without feeling like they are taking the lesser of several options. And so that's the other thing I would advise DMs to do is like when they make these bastions and you populate them with NPCs to facilitate these places or to manage these facilities. Give them options and focus on the role play of it. I think what would be really cool is the players get this bastion, and it's like, okay, well, you have a pub, but you don't have anyone in there, and then allow them to like interview, like just make 3 generic NPCs, give them all like a different personality, different background, different species, and then they can choose the one that they want to interact with, and then they can do that, and that alone I think is probably something that a lot of players would want. It's like they want NPCs that they want to interact with. No one wants to go to the pub and then they have the NPC that they actually really just dislike. So I highly encourage DMs to like let your players do interviews for their facilities, just if only for the roleplay potential of it all. Moving on to things like magic items. A lot of the magic items are pretty much the same as the old book. There are a few new ones. In particular, they added ones from the old Dungeons and Dragons animated TV series. Some of them are pretty basic, but I think the one I like is that if you're a wizard, you can get the Hat of Many Spells. It's literally like the green wizard hat. And what you can do is you can actually, if you're a wizard, you can actually cast a spell that you don't have in your spell book, but then it requires like an intelligence check. And then if you fail that check, it's a random effect based on table. So it's almost like a wild magic hat, and that's kind of cool. I think that's something that would add fun to the game. So I definitely recommend, like, if you have players that are at that level where that's an appropriate item, definitely give it to them, especially, well, you got to be a wizard to use it, so if you have a wizard, definitely, all that. And honestly, I would probably even say, like, I would almost say, like, any arcane magic user. I'd say, like, Warlock, Sorcerer, I'd probably let them use this item. I don't really see the harm in it. I would probably also say, I would probably still say, like, it has to be on the wizard spell list, and it has to be something that, you can't like use your meta magic on a spell from the hat, because it's basically just a way to cast a free spell without spell slot. So I would say you can't use your meta magic on it because it's the hat casting it. But yeah, so magic items are still a big thing. I think the one thing I'm a little disappointed in is, and I can still get this from the old book, but the old book basically had a series of tables where it's like, hey, you have a difficulty encounter of, from this CR to this CR. Here's a loot table for that. Or you have a treasure hoard from this CR to this CR. Here's a loot table for that. And it was a nice way to give loot, without having to put too much onto it. Maybe at the most, you might want to change up the magic item if it's a magic item. Like, honestly, like, it's one of those things where, like, if you have a, depending on your party composition, certain items are going to be more attractive to players than others. So if something that they're not really attracted to, then I'd be like, okay, I'll just switch this out for another magic item on the same table. They kind of have that in this book. The problem is that the loot table, there's 2 loot tables. One only refers to gold, and one only refers to magic items. I frankly don't like that too much. I did like the concept of, like, because they do still have, like, the gemstones and the art pieces in here. But I did like the ability to put those valuable but not necessarily direct monetary things into the loot. But again, it's one of those things where, like, it's easy enough to be like, okay, well, I can, if they have like, 1,000 gold pieces from this encounter, I can put in an art object worth 500 and then just put 500 gold pieces in there and they can decide what to do with the art. So again, it's not terrible, but do keep in mind, like especially with gemstones, because again, some spells will use gemstones and they have to be worth a certain value. So especially if you have players that have those spells, you want to make sure those gemstones are in those treasure hoards. Like at least initially, it might be later on that they just buy the gemstones, in the market. But it would be nice to be like if you're a player and it's like, oh well, I need an agate worth 50 gold for this spell. Well, it sucks if you're like away from a town and you can't cast that spell until you find an agate worth 50 gold. And oh look, it's in a treasure hoard right here. Perfect. Now I can cast that spell. Everybody wins. Another thing that you're going to find in this book is at the very back they have a lore glossary. And I really like this because D&D lore is very dense. And as much as you can, go onto the Forgotten Realms wiki and look up, like let's just see, like you can look up Corellon and be like, okay, like give me the whole history of Corellon. Oh, sorry, I almost dropped my book there. So you can look up the whole history of Corellon, and that's fine. But then you're going to have an entire web page to read, and you probably don't need nearly that much. But you can go to the lore glossary. You can look up Corellon here, and you can have like the paragraph and a half about Corellon, just to give you an idea of who he is. So if you want to do the Forgotten Realms setting specifically, or if you just want to take elements of that and put them into your D&D campaign, you can certainly do that. I will say, I think the one thing I do like about this is that they tell you the pronunciations of a lot of these names, or they give you a couple or they'll give you a couple of pronunciations. Like so for Hadar you can say Hadar or you can say Hadar. It doesn't matter. You can use both of those. I guess the egg is on my face because I've always pronounced it Grumsh, and apparently it's supposed to be pronounced Groomsh. So that's on me. But still, I have to really kind of tell Wizards of the Coast the one thing I really don't like is Groomsh gets like this tiny paragraph, and Corellon gets a much larger paragraph plus another smaller one. And like, I'm sorry, D&D has such a bias against some of its lore sometimes, because it's always about elves. There's so many elf sub-races, there's so much lore about the elves and Corellon and the dark elves and their schism, and like we get it, elves are awesome. Like if you like elves, I am not judging you in the least, but dang, can orcs get a little dang love from Wizards of the Coast? Like, it's bad enough that for the longest time they were basically just like the generic punching bag for adventurers, to the point where you could only play a half orc. But even in the player's handbook, like the new player's handbook, they fixed that. Like they've had orcs, since then. But in the player's handbook, they said, okay, you know what? We're not going to do the half races. You can just play an orc. You don't have to play a half orc if you're doing just the basic rule set. And that's great. But then they give them like the most generic description of like, oh well, they always have the blessings of Groomsh, if nothing else, and it's like, okay, but like no lore about the fact that they've been at war with like all these other species for years, or the fact that like they really struggle to find a place in society, or the fact that maybe even if they do, their gods are probably not necessarily going to be loved amongst all the humans and all the elves that, particularly have a grudge, whose pantheons have a grudge against the Orcish pantheon. Nothing like that. Like, orcs need some dang love from Wizards of the Coast. I know I'm biased because I love my orcs, but it's one of the things where it's like, I feel there's so much story potential in there, and Groomsh is still just getting this tiny paragraph. So Wizards of the Coast fix it. The other thing is that this book does like hit on a lot of lore. Like they have a whole section about the Outer Planes, and I love the Outer Planes because it's something that's very different from anything in reality. Because in D&D, it's like souls are actual verifiable things. The Outer Planes are actual real places that you can go to even when you're alive. Um, and it's just one of those things where it's like, they give the lore about it, but again, like you go to the wiki, you're going to get like pages and pages about, places like Acheron or, Arborea or Elysium. And that's fine, again, if you want to really adhere to that. But players don't need that much. But I do love hearing about it, and I think it's one of those things where I think a lot of players, I think a lot of DMs in general, they don't necessarily want to use the lore of, the Forgotten Realms. Like, they might use the Outer Planes as, like, a series of afterlives, but they're not going to worry about the Great Wheel cosmology. They might not even worry about, like, the long-standing feuds between elves and orcs, or, fiends and celestials, or anything like that. It's just, they have fiends and they have celestials, and they fight each other. Um, so I like that there's lore in there, and I personally, I think more than anything, I like getting lore from these books. But at the same time, it's like it's usually just so brief and so generic, and that's what the wiki is for. But at the same time, it's like I feel like every time they do that, they're cutting back on the mechanics of the book. It's like I don't necessarily like with Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. I don't necessarily need like the pages and pages of lore about dragons, even if they're fun to read. I'm looking at the mechanical stuff, like okay, like what kind of items am I getting Fizbans? What kind of species or subclasses, or what new can I add to the game with this book? Because I can make my own lore. I can go on the wiki and read the lore about dragons, and I wouldn't need to buy that book. Um, and in some degree, I think that's maybe a little true for this. But again, this is supposed to be a basic guide. It's going to be, if you want to play this game, here's some basic lore that you can use. You can adopt it. So I understand why it's in there. But in some ways, I would almost rather just have a separate book. Like honestly, I think if D&D just put out separate books that were just like, hey, here's lore, or here's ways to explore these kinds of, creatures or settings or things. Like honestly, Wizards of the Coast, if you make a book all about orcs and orcish culture and their history, and sure, if you want to throw in some subclasses in there, I'd be perfectly happy with that. I mean, dwarves get their own type of barbarian, for crying out loud. Like, you're telling me an orc doesn't get that? Like honestly, orcish. I mean, I think these days they probably wouldn't do a species only, like a species only barbarian like they did with the dwarves. But it would be nice if they had something that was like flavored as like coming from the orcs in terms of barbarian. But again, it is what it is. We get what we get. That's what homebrew is really for. The other thing they have in here is they have a whole section about the setting of Greyhawk, which is, for those of you who don't know about D&D, that was basically the original D&D setting made by Gary Gygax. And, they give a whole lot of explanation about, the lore of it. They describe the setting, and they basically give you what you want to wear. If you want to create a setting in Greyhawk, or if you want to create a campaign in Greyhawk, you have everything you need right here. Like they have, the list of deities. They have, the important places. They even give you a little, a map for everything, which is good. I always like getting maps. Like with Planescape, I love getting the map of Outland. Eberron, I liked having the map of the continents and all that. I think probably the last thing I'll touch on here is, and I think this is important for every DM, but I think most experienced DMs probably already know this, is they have a section, and it's what D&D is not. And this is an important one, because you have bad faith players out there, and instead of wanting to play a harmless fantasy game, they either want to live out maybe some of their less socially acceptable fantasies, or they see it as like a video game to beat and exploit. And those are not the people you want at your table. And so, the one thing they say is, it's like they have a whole section, and it's like they say D&D is not an economic simulator. It is not designed to be an economic simulator. So if a player finds the infinite money glitch, they did not find the infinite money glitch, and and again, that's something that most DMs will know. And I think most good players don't try to find the infinite money glitch. But at the same time, you do have players that do want to have that fantasy of running a business, and that's fine. Um, I think the I think the advice I would give in addition to that is that if you do have those players that really want to run a business in whatever fantasy world you've created, that's fine. But keep in mind that you don't have to make a whole economic system, but you do have to have some of the realities of an economic system, because it's one of those things where it's if the players are, I don't know, selling potions of healing. Let's say they've made a very successful, potion selling business, and they they're cranking them out, much faster than any of the NPCs would. Well, I think the easiest thing to do that, especially if they're not trying to exploit the system specifically, it's just that this is what they want to do with the game. Say, okay, well, now the market is flooded with health potions because you guys crank them out faster, and you're putting all these other health potions out of business, and you now have a monopoly. And certain people wouldn't like that, and that can easily be the impetus to the next plot hook. It's there's a rival business that's trying to find your methods and be able to replicate them in order to compete with you. And again, that's fine. But again, this is assuming that the players are just doing this because they find it fun and not because they want the infinite money glitch. And even if you don't want to do that, you can easily say, okay, I as the DM have to limit how much money you get from this, because players at this level are not supposed to have 5 trillion gold or whatever insane amount they've been able to make. So it's definitely a section that's worth a read, especially for new DMs. Most experienced DMs are going to know this. They know how to handle these kind of players. So they're fine. But it's nice to see that affirmation in there, because I think especially with especially with D&D getting more popular, and with 5e being arguably the most popular version of the game, if only because it's around during this time where interest has peaked in D&D. I think it's one of those things where you do have an increase in those bad actors, or these people that think D&D is supposed to be an economic simulator. So definitely keep that in mind. If you're a new DM, definitely read this back, from front to back. A lot of experienced DMs probably don't need maybe about a third of this book. About a third of this book is things like if you're an experienced DM, you know what a skill check is. You don't have to worry about that. You know how to run the game. You know the different genres of the game. You've probably even ran several different genres of the game by this point. You probably know some of the magic items a little more intimately, because you've probably given your players a bag of tricks several times, or you've given them the boots of Elvenkind. Granted, there's new items like the hat of many spells, but again, DMs know how the magic items work even on a basic level. So they're not going to need to know that so much as just having the reference of, okay, here are how these magic items work, so that if you don't remember, you can go back and go, oh yeah, it turns out that you need to make a intelligence check for this particular item. But definitely, if you're a new DM, give it a read. One other thing, and this is, okay, hold on. Now, I will say this. Here I think is the big failing of this book, and the big failing of the 2024 Player's Handbook, is you'll see that on page 55, there is creating a background. Now, as you might recall from my 2024 Player's Handbook episode, my biggest criticism was that they took the stat increases that you would normally get from your species and put them in the background. And I thought this was both silly and dumb, because certain classes, like if you want to be a barbarian, if you're a barbarian, your strength and your constitution are going to be the things you want. and there were only 2 backgrounds that gave those stats specifically. Some had strength and some had constitution, but a lot of them did not have both. And that to me was kind of dumb, because I don't believe that players should have to suffer a detriment for making what is essentially a roleplay choice. I mean, mechanically, I think if a player says, "Hey, I actually want like these tool sets or these skill sets from this pack, or even this feat," because the feats are tied to there too. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, "I want these things, but I don't want to be saddled with dexterity and intelligence. I want to have my strength and my constitution." I think that's perfectly fine. And one of the things they said is that, if like just at my table personally, if I'm going to be running this, I would tell my players, "Hey, pick whatever background you want and just put the stats wherever." And I'd say to a certain degree, I'd even, extend that to feats. It's like if you don't like the feat for your class, just pick a different feat. Well, on page 55 in here, they have creating a custom background. And just to give you an idea, it goes 1, choose abilities. Choose 3 abilities that seem appropriate for the background, and it gives you the rundown of the abilities. You choose a feat, then it says, choose any origin feat. Choose skill proficiencies. Choose 2 skill proficiencies. 4, choose a tool proficiency. Choose 1 tool proficiency. And then choose equipment worth 50 gold pieces. So, again, if this is me, I would just have all my players do the custom background. Like that's absolutely silly. Because here's the thing, it's like, they decide, "Oh, well, I want to be a farmer, but I want to go with the tavern brawler feat, not the tough feat." And it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, just take the feat. And that's basically what this is. They should have taken this creating a background section. Like, it's literally 1 page. They should have taken this. They should have put it in the player's handbook and said, "Hey, these are not all the backgrounds known to mankind." And in fact, you can even look at some older D&D books, and you can find things like anthropologist or urban bounty hunter in other campaigns or other source books. And those are things that are like very mundane. They're not exactly setting specific. Like Wild Spacer, I can easily see a DM being like, "Okay, I don't want to have anyone from space. You can't be a Wild Spacer." That's a very perfectly reasonable ask. I don't think it's an unreasonable ask to be like, "I want my character to be an anthropologist," but if I'm going through that book, there's no anthropologist there. And they even say, like, okay, if you want to use a different background from an older book, just do that and then put the stats wherever you want and then choose a feat that you want. So it's like honestly, at that point, like, why not put the create the background in the player's handbook and be like, "Hey, this is not everything known to man. If you want to do something that's not in here, or if you want to change up the existing ones, use this." And instead, they put it in the DMG. And again, like, I don't know, like, I feel it's just unnecessarily. It's unnecessarily complicated for what the simple solution is of, "Hey, like, you can just put an asterisk. You don't even need to create anything. Just put an asterisk and say, you know what? You can change these backgrounds however you want. Whether you want to change the stats, whether you want to change the feat, whether you want to change the tool or the skill proficiencies, change them however you want. It's okay." Maybe with the caveat of talk to your DM in case you want to play something weird like time-traveling cyborg from the future here to destroy John Connor. But at the same time, it's like, honestly, DMs, new and old, if you can disagree with me if you want, but just let your players do the custom background. Don't make them stick with strength. If again, like, to be a barbarian, don't stick them with constitution and wisdom, or strength and dexterity or something like that. Just let them pick the stats they want. Let them pick the feat they want too, because, like, again, I think it's kind of silly that, okay, you can be a farmer, but you could be the farmer that after they're done plowing the field, they get drunk, and they get in bar fights. I think that's a perfectly reasonable background to do. So yeah. So again, a lot of this book is kind of standard fare. They have rules for chases. They have the random settlement generator where, you can like, have the random table for like the name of the tavern. You could have like the table for how big it is, or, what the current local problem is. That's all standard fare. They have the rules for chases. They have rules for other things. They do expand things. Like they do have expanded rules for poisons and how to get those and how those work. They do have I think they have more explicit rules for like certain traps and how those work and how to make your own traps. Like I think that's an important one because especially again, if you're an experienced DM, it's like, okay, by this point, players know to like, check for tripwires in front of them, and they're going to be doing those perception tests. But I think it's interesting if you want to create your own traps and like, throw that curveball at your players. So yeah. So overall, final thoughts. Overall, this is a really good book. I think it's an important book if you want to run the frankly improved rules of the 2024 Player's Handbook. I think especially if the monster manual pulls through and sticks with the modified encounter building formula that's in this book, then you're going to have a good time. Like the D&D players will be eating well with the 5.5e. But again, like a lot of this Dungeon Master's Guide is going to be for Dungeon Masters who are newer, or Dungeon Masters who like maybe want improved rules. Because again, it's like with rogues, it's like for a long time, like rogues almost like never use poisons because the rules for poisons were either very generic, very vague, or even just sometimes difficult. It's like, okay, it's like, where were you going to get your poison? Because like it's hard to believe that there used to be a poison cellar right on the corner, of the city. So it's one of those things where it's like I do like there are those improved rules for that, and I think it actually does make them like at least moderately useful to where like if you want to be the assassin who poisons people, you can pick that poison and be like, hey, I'm going to use this poison to, I'm going to poison this wine and I'm going to send it to, this guy so that we can eliminate him and then the DM can like go from there and decide what they want to do, whether it succeeds, whether the guy in question has like a taste tester or something, and that guy dies, and then it results in like some other wacky shenanigans that you want to do as a DM. So again, there's a lot of good in here. I do recommend buying the book. I think it is. I think it was a worthwhile purchase. I definitely will get the Monster Manual mostly because I want to see if it does work with the Dungeon Master's Guide encounter building section. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on that. As always, thank you for joining me, and keep doing what makes you awesome. Thank you very much, and goodbye.